Good morning. I'm Harley Schlanger of the LaRouche organization with your daily update for January 15th, 2021. We're in the midst of an extraordinary confluence of events. Things are happening day by day that one would never have been able to predict months, even weeks ago. You have the impeachment rush to judgment, which showed the absolute hysterical desperation of Democrats acting on behalf of their global banker sponsors to not only get rid of Donald Trump, but to criminalize the movement that he catalyzed and to ensure that there will be no opposition to their intention for a Biden administration going to war and putting the United States under a global banker's dictatorship. The impeachment was an act of complete folly. With no investigation, no time for real consideration, but it was pushed through. You have warnings now of violence that will lead up to the January 20th inauguration of Biden, with troops on the street, with rumors that Trump is still planning to carry out a coup. There are all kinds of stories that are emerging, which are just adding to the instability and the sense of anxiety of the population. You have the censorship, the big tech, the social media acting as corrupt monopolies to silence the President of the United States, not allowing him to talk to the people of the United States, much less to his 70-something million followers. So this is something which is unprecedented and which is leading to a real blowback coming from not only other countries, but civil libertarians in the United States, including Democrats who are saying, wait a second, this could be turned against us. Now you have the rumor today that the president has decided to finally release a foot-high stack of documents related to Russiagate to get the full story out of the corruption of the institutional networks, the intelligence community, in its cooperation with the United Kingdom to run Russiagate, to run the Ukraine impeachment, to do everything possible to destroy President Trump's commitment to establish a new paradigm of relations with the United States, Russia, and China. Hopefully that is being released and it will be available immediately. And then finally, questions related to the Great Reset, to the continued crisis of the COVID pandemic, to the economic insecurity, bad economic news, and so on. So anxiety is definitely running high, and in some cases it makes it very difficult for people to have the calm concentration to be able to deliberate on what should be done. In the dialogue I had with Helga Zepp-LaRouche a couple of days ago, she emphasized the importance of working to establish a higher plateau in the quality of thinking of not just our movement, but of the population as a whole. That if people are obsessed with the instantaneous input from social media, it becomes impossible to have an ability to have a reflection. That's part of the whole point of social media, to put you on this whirl of events where you go clicking from one story to another and you lose the ability to have any kind of concentrated thinking. So I've had several questions asking me, how do we get to this higher plateau? How do we avoid the neurotic impulses which tend to dominate social discourse and communication among fellow citizens? Now, I would say there are a couple of things that are necessary. The first is you have to make sure you're concentrated on the big picture. Don't get pulled into the smaller stories, the human interest side of things, or even the profiles that appeal to so-called left progressives or right-wing activists or libertarian conservatives. You have to have a picture of what's going on in the whole world because the United States is right now under a censorship umbrella that makes what existed in East Germany under Honecker parallel to what we're seeing in the United States. Where do you go for the truth? Who can you trust? Well, this has been obliterated by the effects of the social media and the coup plotters. So you have to have a picture of the big picture, a sense of the big picture. And you can get that through us, through the LaRouche Organization, the Schiller Institute, and so on, to make sure you're not being manipulated by gossip, rumors, or lies. Our record has been unsurpassed due to the forecasting ability and method developed by Lyndon LaRouche and continued by our associates today. And this is really crucial because if you don't have a perspective, a conjunctural perspective, you get caught up in the swirl of events and you tend to grab onto those things which fit your profile, your psychological profile. And remember, a major part of social media is to change the way you think by creating these different identities, whether they're gender identities, whether they're racial identities, tribal identities, ethnic identities, community identities, to have you thinking on the smallest level about your immediate concerns and immediate security without recognizing that those will be determined by a much larger process. So LaRouche's method is unsurpassed, and furthermore, we've developed over the years a international network of correspondents and collaborators, as well as many, many people inside institutions in the United States and in the population in the United States. And we listen to what people say, and we form assessments based on using and applying LaRouche's method. Now, I would say one other aspect of this: immerse yourself in classical culture. Turn off the television. The popular media is designed to stupefy you, and the social media is designed to change your neural pathways so that you make decisions based on spur-of-the-moment impulses as opposed to thoughtful consideration. This is the Beethoven year, extended into this year, the 250th anniversary of his birth, extended into this year. Listen to Beethoven's music. Study what he did with his life. Look at the works, the dramas, and the poems of Friedrich Schiller, of Shakespeare. Look at the incredible music and art and drama of the great thinkers in history, as well as the philosophy, going back to Plato and the Greeks. This gives you not just a certain amount of calm, but calm based on the idea that you have an independent power of judgment, which will not be manipulated by the momentary whims and disinformation coming out of these so-called powerful institutions. Now, another question: can the LaRouche Organization set up a social network platform given the censorship and the shutting down of platforms? I don't really know. We're going to use whichever platforms are still up, which we have access to. But I think the bigger question here is we have to fight against this censorship. This goes against the Constitution of the United States, the suppression of a free press and freedom of speech. It's un-American, as we were reminded by the Mexican president, Lopez Obrador, in his comments a couple of days ago, as we're reminded by civil libertarians such as Glenn Greenwald and journalist Caitlin Johnstone. What we're seeing is the imposition of a dictatorship over ideas. This is something that Edward Snowden warned us about, as he has continued to speak out against the use of the social network and the cyber space to control and shape the narratives. So again, develop your own independent outlook, and that requires a fight against the dominant narratives that are being crammed down our throats. It may require some doing over time, but we have to defeat the monopoly control of big media and big tech over information. You know, if you lived in East Germany in the early 1980s, it seemed as though you were always going to be under the dictatorship of the Communist Party and the Honecker regime. Parts of East Germany were called the Valley of the Clueless because people had no access to the world outside of them. Well, that's what's happening in the United States today. Outside of gossip news and social news and who's pregnant and whose relationship split up, What do Americans actually know about what's going on? It's a censorship. But the important thing is that millions of Americans have awakened to the idea that they're being force-fed crap to change the way they think about the world. And so we have an opportunity now to take this opposition to the establishment to a higher level, to the new plateau that Mrs. LaRouche was talking about. Now, finally, just a kind of funny question. What do you make of Mike Pompeo's last-minute resignation, his announcement that he will resign on Inauguration Day? I don't know, maybe he's trying to get into the Biden administration. Mike Pompeo has acted as a saboteur of much of Donald Trump's intentions. Going back to the peace he tried to arrange with North Korea through work with China and Russia, that was sabotaged by Bolton, but also Pompeo. The attempt to create a war between the United States and Iran, the attempt to organize a containment and encirclement of China, the continued attacks on Russia, even though it's proven that there was no Russian meddling or interference in the U.S. election campaign. Well, Pompeo has the same line as Pelosi on this, that you have to look at Putin as an enemy. So my only regret is that Mike Pompeo wasn't kicked out with Bolton a year and a half ago, and that he's continued to poison the environment internationally and to convince people that Donald Trump is an American unilateralist who only asserts American sovereignty to have control over other nations, which is what you would get if you listen to Pompeo. Although Trump personally has repeatedly stated, including in the September 2019 UN General Assembly address he gave, that his idea of sovereignty is that it's a principle which should be shared by all nations. As we wish to be sovereign in the United States, so should people in France wish to be sovereign, in Germany wish to be sovereign, to have governments which act in the interests of the people of that nation. And if they do that, they'll look for cooperation with other nations and for dialogue to resolve conflicts that might emerge. Pompeo's different. Pompeo asserts that our sovereignty requires that we suppress the sovereign wishes of other nations and make them adhere to our policy. This is what the Obama doctrine was. This is what the PNAC, Bush, Wolfowitz, Rumsfeld, Cheney doctrine was, that the world must respond only to the interests of supposedly American interests, but what are those interests really? They're not American interests. Who's benefited from these wars? Who's benefited from the development of big tech and the social media? It's been the billionaires of Davos, the Wall Street City of London manipulators, who have dictated the policy and have reaped rewards from it, while the rest of us have been suffering. So to look at Mike Pompeo as an American leader is a joke. He's an operative of enemy forces of the City of London and has been since the beginning of his tenure in the Trump administration, first as CIA director, then as Secretary of State. So with Pompeo, I say good riddance. We wish we could have said that many, many years ago. So those are the questions I have from today that I'm going to answer. Over the weekend, look at the LaRouche Organization and the Schiller Institute for a couple of events coming up. And we post every single day news stories and videos. And I'll be back with you on Monday.